So, you're Peter Darrell Evans, and you find yourself in charge of the Virgin New Adventures, a series of the first original Doctor Who novels. Great! Now who's going to write them? If you're lucky like Peter here, there might already have been a stable of writers from the previous line of Doctor Who books you can draw from. These writers have a portfolio of writing for the franchise that you can look at, but more importantly, their experience writing under tight deadlines means quick turnarounds. You need to produce these books quickly and consistently if you hope to build an audience. To quote Darrell Evans in an article in Starlog, "Since I was starting off a completely new series, it became essential that I had authors whom I could rely upon to deliver. Professional writers tend to get their act together more quickly. Also, when I know a writer has a track record, I can make a decision based on less text." But what happens when you run out of those experienced writers? You gotta start letting new people in. Let young, unproven talent step up to the plate and see what they can do. The first of these fresh faces was a young man named Paul Cornell, and he had to work 4 times harder to earn his spot. Paul very quickly produced a large chunk of text. From that, I was able to judge that he was a very talented writer. I then asked him for some more, and again he produced very quickly. On the strength of what I thought was a very good story that fits well into the Timewyrm series, I commissioned him to do it. I have subsequently received a considerable number of good manuscripts, but in those early stages, he was among the first and the best. There's a lesson to be learned from that. You can be considerably talented, you can have a bunch of really fascinating, groundbreaking ideas, but if you can't produce quickly and reliably, then publishers may not want to take a risk on you. The Virgin New Adventures took a risk. What they ended up with was a writer and a book that would push the series to new limits, that would show the world just what Doctor Who could be in the literary world. This is Timewyrm Revelation by Paul Cornell. Incidentally, in that Starlog interview, Peter Darrell Evans totally spoils the big twist for this book. The book wasn't even out yet. I mean, I'm going to spoil it too, but at least I waited 25 years. So, Timewyrm Revelation. Putting aside its quality, this book has so many interesting angles to approach it from. I'm not sure where to start. It's the final book of the Timewyrm miniseries, a miniseries with no real structure or plan for itself, a book tasked with wrapping up a bunch of dangling threads from 3 books whose authors barely communicated with each other. It's the first book in the series written by someone who didn't contribute to the target novelizations, and in fact, it's Paul Cornell's very first novel ever. Maybe we should start with this cover. The Doctor, dancing with the skeletal personification of death, on the moon, while an astronaut of small stature watches, with a snow-covered church in the background. This is not stylized. This is not some kind of artistic metaphor. This is something that actually happens in this book. Okay, so at this point, the Timewyrm has become something of a force of nature. Her character arc, her rise to demigodhood, actually reminds me a lot of the Elemist from Animorphs. She starts as a normal member of her race, learning advanced technologies and absorbing the minds of everyone around her, becoming a powerful biomechanical being. Then, after being attacked by another powerful being, she finds herself thrown into a vortex where her consciousness spreads across the infinite, weaving itself in time and space. She even built a god machine in the form of a white sphere, just like the Elemist in the Time Matrix. The main difference is that in this comparison, the Elemist is the bad guy and the Krayak is the Doctor. That's not to suggest intended reference on Kay Applegate's part, it's just a nifty parallel. The Timewyrm is close to becoming the dominant being in the universe, and the only person that stands in her way is the Doctor. It's time for one last battle. Winner takes all. The Timewyrm's first step is to isolate the Doctor. The Doctor, in his attempts to track the Timewyrm down, follows some clues to a small 19th century English village called Cheldon Boniface, a town the Doctor has been to many, many times before. The town is celebrating Christmas at the local tavern, and all seems jolly. A perfect scene for a Christmas card. The Doctor yawned and stood up, stretching. "It's getting late. I think I'd better check on Ace." George laughed, perhaps noting that the Doctor's expression was once more become alert. "She's probably not used to the mead. Come on, you haven't even touched your pie." The doctor relaxed, picked up the pie, and was about to take a big bite. "What time is it anyway?" George glanced at his wrist. The doctor dived for the stairs. The villagers leapt up and rushed after him, their hands catching at his coattails, ripping the fabric. The doctor fended off a few with his umbrella, tripping the leader. "Seize him!" shouted George, incensed. The doctor and Ace get separated, Ace chased by some kind of small astronaut, until she runs past the forest, past the air bubble, and learns where they really are. On the moon. The Timewyrm had reconstructed the old village as a trap to lure the doctor into a false sense of security. And it works. The doctor is captured, and Ace dies of asphyxiation. Well, sort of. It seems your friend here is only mostly dead. At this point, the Timewyrm extracts Ace's consciousness, her memory, her very being, and transports it to a mysterious, illogical realm. At first, she finds herself in a library. The librarian's a pleasant old man, and he leads her to a study. However, things start to turn sour when she's attacked by tentacle monsters. Soon she finds herself in a waiting room, with demons dragging screaming people into back rooms. Ace quickly realizes that she's in hell. Back on the moon, we learn that George the innkeeper is actually Lieutenant Hemmings, the put-upon officer from the If the Nazis Won alternative timeline that no longer exists. The Timewyrm picked him up as an operative to her cause, disguising herself as the Norse gods, promising Hemmings a place in Valhalla if he assisted in taking out the Doctor. Having been made a fool of in Timewyrm Exodus, Hemmings has no problem with this. As for the tiny astronaut, this is actually a young boy named Chad Boyle, who was a schoolyard bully who picked on young Ace back in early elementary school. Ace's legal name is Dorothy, by the way. Boyle is also from an alternate timeline, one where he murdered young Ace with a brick. That's actually one of the first scenes in the book. The day before, Boyle had stepped on Dorothy's toe in assembly. Quite offhandedly, Dorothy had pushed her elbow into his stomach and sent him flying with a trip, and the head had told him off for messing about. She was strange anyway. Nobody would play with her. She said she wanted to be an astronaut, which was crazy because girls couldn't be astronauts. Everybody knew that. He skipped over to the staring girl, and while her back was turned, raised his hand. The brick was cold, gritty, and hard through his mitten. His raised hand was silhouetted against the low sun, so perhaps it was the sun's shade that made the girl turn. She screamed. Boyle savagely swung the weapon down, splitting Dorothy's skull and killing her outright. I mean, holy shit, guys, this is page 7. You know you're in for a pretty intense experience when child murder is in the first chapter. This brings us to the final factor in play, Saul the Sentient Church. Yes, well, more specific, a disembodied consciousness that people build a church around. Nobody really knows what Saul is. Saul doesn't even know, though the prevailing theory is that the hill Saul resides on was a place of worship for several different religions, from the Celts to the Saxons to the Christians, and all this worship concentrated a large amount of psychic energy, from which Saul was born. Saul the Sentient Church lives in the real Cheldon Boniface. He's the reason the Doctor makes his visits, and the church is run and maintained by the Treelaw family, who are among the few aware of Saul's presence. It's the Sunday before Christmas, 1992, and the Reverend Treelaw is giving his Christmas sermon. In attendance is a married couple who just moved into town, Emily and Peter Hutchings. Peter is a Cambridge professor of mathematics working out on some new complex theories. His wife Emily is an artistic type, thinking about becoming a writer. The two moved here to help get over some grief. Emily recently had a miscarriage and can never carry another child, and getting away from the big city might help with the healing process. So Treelaw is giving his sermon when the Doctor suddenly rushes in and hands Emily a baby. "Hold this for a minute," he says, and then rushes out. After which, violent energies whip through the church. Most everyone panics and runs out, and before you know it, the Timewyrm teleports Saul to the moon, accidentally bringing along Emily, Peter, Treelaw, and the baby. So with the final pieces on the board, the Timewyrm makes her crucial move. Death stood on the lunar surface, her robes billowing in the particle wind that lashed the dust continually. She was a classical death, a skull and a hood, and her creator had given her a spark of consciousness. In the dark sockets, a fire blazed, and behind it, she pondered her own mortality. Life for her, thought Death, was just a function, a whim. She would complete her task and then be reduced back to the dust that had formed her. And that wouldn't be so bad. She hadn't desired consciousness in her previous state, and now she had it, she had discovered that all life brought was pain. Her creator and her victim were approaching her where she stood, only a short distance from the church. "Do you know death, Doctor?" asked the Timewyrm, displaying its creation proudly. "Yes," the doctor grinned as he inspected the skeletal form. "We've met before. Very poetic, very young. Does she have a scythe?" "She has no need of one," laughed the Timewyrm. "I have armed her very well." "I can imagine," murmured the doctor. "Tell me, Death, what are the hours like in your line? All go, I should think." "She cannot speak, nor can she act outside my wills. Your words will not cheat this death, Doctor." "They have in the past." The doctor took off his hat, his face stern with what the Timewyrm took to be fear. "Get on with it." The worm motioned Death to stand by the doctor. She did so, reaching out skeletal fingers. But then came a slight hesitation. Death paused, shocked by the import of her task. This man was full of concepts that she barely had the mind to think of. The doctor suddenly gripped her hand and her waist. "May I have the pleasure?" They waltzed off, the Time Lord and the Icon, in great swirling steps. After 4 whirls in the low gravity, Death released her partner, and he fell, slowly, into a plume of lunar dust. The dancer lay still, his limbs jutting in the graceless directions of oblivion. So the doctor is dead. His body and Ace's are brought into the church, and all Saul and his occupants can do is wait to see what happens next. Much like Ace, the doctor's consciousness, his being, is brought into this hellish realm, where he quickly catches up with Ace. The Timewyrm sends Hemmings and Boyle in after them, by killing them both, as you do. The Timewyrm straight up decapitates Hemmings, boss of the year, that one. The doctor seems to know where he's going, tells Ace they need to traverse to the center of this hell, towards a place called the Pit. After many nightmares, they encounter the Timewyrm on the edge of the pit, where Ace finally discovers where they really are. "You think that this world is the afterlife?" "No," Ace frowned. "Not really. Don't know what it is." "It is my natural habitat. I am a computer virus." "We're in a computer?" "Let me finish. I am a computer virus that can live in any sophisticated data processing system. I can take over the brains like Boyle's by implanting mechanisms within them, or I can inhabit them totally. A normal human can only fight my control for a short time. This brain has been fighting me for months." "This is a mind?" Ace looked around with a new realization. "This is a person's memory, their dreams." "Exactly." The Timewyrm took a step forward and bared its teeth, hissing. "I brought you, Boyle, and Hemmings here as pure data, pure memory. You stand on the bridge between the brain's twin lobes, above the pit of the unconscious. Can't you guess where you are?" "Oh my God." A horrible suspicion was dawning on Ace. She looked down at the fallen form of the doctor, the blood that was spreading across the rock around him. "No." "Yes. This isn't just a mind, a vessel for my intelligence. This is a powerful entity, a lord of space and time. Do you not see, human?" The Timewyrm's claws burst from their sockets, and the creature bellowed its secret until it echoed from the depths of the pit below. "This is the mind of the Doctor." Paul Cornell was born in 1967 in the United Kingdom, and his future was set by the age of 10. In early grade school, Cornell had an English class that was constant essay writing, just non-stop, 4-page minimums, and he hated this. He hated these assignments, he hated the teacher, and finally, he just snapped, writing what he assumed was a scathing 12-page takedown of this awful woman. She gave him an A. Wait, I can get rewarded writing down how I feel? I'm in! Around that same time, Cornell had been avoiding Doctor Who. His classmates would tell him all the scary bits from the show, and it disturbed him enough that he refused to watch it for a long time. Finally, this timid little boy decided, if I don't overcome my fear of this show now, I never will. His first Doctor Who story was The Brain of Morbius. Now, if you're not familiar with The Brain of Morbius, it's not exactly sunshine and lollipops. It's basically a twist on Frankenstein, with the monster being a giant lobster-clawed apparition, Dr. Frankenstein constantly plotting to decapitate the Doctor, and a mystical cult thrown in for good measure. If you're trying to avoid scary stuff, Brain of Morbius is not the story to pick. But Cornell worked through it, and at the end was completely taken in. But after 4 episodes, when I was making myself watch it every week, the Doctors won! The good guys won! And I was so amazed by that. I was blown away that he'd actually beaten the bad guys because it looked pretty damn impossible from where I was sitting. It was a huge release of tension, a huge catharsis. It was brilliant, and from then on, of course I was addicted, as you do become addicted to things which you've won over. And I think that was the whole mystery of it for me. The fact that I had been terribly scared of it, and now I wasn't. That's what really got me hooked. So you got a kid who hated writing, so he wrote a lot to spite it, and ended up loving it. And who was scared of Doctor Who, so he watched it to spite it, and ended up loving it. From there, he began to write Doctor Who fan fiction, and starting at the age of 15, Cornell submitted his stories to pretty much every Doctor Who fanzine around. He favored writing stories for the 5th Doctor Tegan and Nyssa, the current TARDIS crew, and for a time, Cornell's favorite. It was in the fanzine scene where the ideas of Timewyrm Revelation began to take form. Cornell would end up writing a multi-part story for the fanzine Queen Bat called Total Eclipse, which is where Saul the Sentient Church, the moon setting, and the idea of the Doctor and his companions walking around the Doctor's subconscious all came from. The Timewyrm wasn't there, naturally, and instead of Hemmings, there were a couple of time travelers from a future dictatorship that had come back to fix the past. And it was the 5th Doctor instead of the 7th Doctor, naturally. The late 80s saw Cornell's first professional publication, a review of the Rocky Horror Picture Show for Starburst magazine. He then won a Young Writers competition for the BBC, getting a short television play called Kingdom Come produced for a show called Debuted 2. He also started submitting 7th Doctor stories to the official Doctor Who magazine, 2 of which were picked up in 1990. Stairway to Heaven involved the Doctor discovering an inhumane exhibit in a space museum, but more interesting was a 2-page story called Teenage Kicks, where the Doctor brings Ace to a seedy London bar to help Ace get over some of her personal demons while simultaneously dealing with an alien threat, much in a similar way to the Doctor forcing Ace to confront her childhood fears in Ghostlight. We talked about how each of these authors felt about writing for the 7th Doctor. John Peel hated the character's guts. Terrence Dicks was a bit unfamiliar with this specific iteration of the character, but knew enough about the character in general to wing it. And Nigel Robinson loved Ace, but didn't really feel he understood what the 7th Doctor was about. Paul Cornell loves the 7th Doctor. He has repeatedly called 7 his all-time favorite, even replacing the 5th Doctor who he spent so much time writing for. He fully embraced the idea of Time's champion, of the master manipulator, of the chess master, and wrote the first story in the line that was distinctly made for this version of the Doctor. In the evenings, the Doctor would serve a mug of something hot, and he and Ace would talk about history and politics and science. Then he would say that he had some loose ends to tie up and bid her good night. These loose ends, Ace supposed to be the preparation work for the Doctor's tricks. During the night, she would wake up at the distant sound of landing and be concerned. After the first time, she had asked the Doctor what he did at night. "Putting props in place," he had said, "making sure people know their lines, sometimes leaving notes on the script. All the universe is a stage, Ace. Acting's not enough for me. I like to direct." These little touches, the night moves in the Time Lord's game, were not apparently dangerous. They consisted of such things as moving items of furniture, research on when things happened, and making sure certain couples never met. Bit mean, that last one. So it's only natural to discover that the Doctor has been playing the Timewyrm as much as she's been playing him. The Timewyrm has been playing with the Doctor's mind since he allowed the 3rd Doctor's personality to take over in Timewyrm Genesis, adding a lot of meaning to a scene that was basically John Peel going, "Man, the 3rd Doctor was so much better than the 7th Doctor." Her plan is to use Ace to slip into the Doctor's mind so that she wouldn't be seen as a threat and have her damage his defenses. Once in, the Timewyrm intends to destroy the Doctor's identity from the inside, which would release a great deal of psychic energy that she could force Saul to focus, creating a psychic explosion that would knock the moon out of orbit, sending it crashing to Earth, causing the destruction of our world. She would end up destroying billions of time streams while also getting a nifty Time Lord body she can ride around in, making her unstoppable. The Doctor's plan pretty much counteracts all of that. He's been aware of the Timewyrm's meddling for a while, and so sent subtle suggestions to use Saul in her plans. Hiding within the church walls is a crystal device that can be used to create a vortex into the Doctor's mental dimension. While trapped within his own mind, the Doctor is able to send poetic messages subconsciously to Saul. Saul repeats the poems, and Emily recognizes strange beats within them. After Emily writes these odd beats out, Peter recognizes them as part of a complex mathematical equation, which leads them to figure out how to use this device. Emily can then enter the Doctor's mind and extract him and Ace, sending their consciousnesses back into their bodies where they can be revived. At which point the Timewyrm would be completely isolated within the Doctor's mind, where the Doctor can use his own mental abilities to crush and destroy her for good. But that's the boring stuff. The real meat and potatoes of this book is the exploration of various themes and presenting some fresh ideas about the Doctor's character. As Ace and the Doctor traverse his subconscious mind, they encounter the Doctor's previous selves, retired from active duty and now maintaining different parts of his subconscious. The librarian Ace met early on is actually the first Doctor, trying to maintain the Doctor's memories and knowledge. The third Doctor has made a little retirement home for himself, away from all the blustery soldiers he had to deal with day in and day out. The fourth Doctor works as a ferryman, transporting thoughts and ideas from one section of the brain to another. To Cornell's credit, this could easily have turned into a parade of previous Doctors, but A, he keeps their roles minor and doesn't identify them right away, and B, he doesn't use all the Doctors. The second and sixth Doctors are a no-show. Whatever their functions are in the Doctor's mind, we never see. And can I just stress how new of an idea this was back in 1991? Because at no point in Doctor Who's original 26-year run did we get a story about the Doctor as a character. Yes, the Doctor is the main character, he's the hero of the story, and things about the Doctor's character could be implied from small details in the scripts to the nuances each performer gave the character. The way John Pertwee throws back his drink at the end of The Green Death, so good. But the Doctor was never really put under the microscope the way he is here. Oh, it's pretty common now. The Ninth Doctor working out his grief from the Timewyrm, the rise and fall of the Time Lord victorious, the 12th Doctor locked in a prison of his own nightmares. Timewyrm Revelation was the first indication that stories about the Doctor's character could even work. The idea of fractured identities don't just apply to the Doctor. We see Ace run through a few herself. As she's chased around in this dreamscape by her childhood bully, her identity is damaged, she loses and regains memories, and her visual presence changes accordingly. We have the Ace we know, assertive, strong-willed, standing up against those who target the weak. We get Dottie, Ace's childhood self, bullied and insecure and helpless. And we have Dorothy, a version of Ace where instead of rejecting societal norms, she embraced them. Instead of taking a punkish attitude, she became an airhead popular girl who wore pink dresses and went out dancing with the girls. It's frightening in the suggestion that one's circumstances could make them such a different person, that so much of your own identity depends on your circumstances. It's only when faced with injustice that Ace is able to shed this Dorothy persona and be the person she wishes to be. I get a sense of kinship between Ace and Cornell. Reading a lot of the interviews he did back in the early 1990s, he was a bit of a headstrong ass, and some of that can be seen in Ace. I imagine if Ace had Cornell's English teacher, she would have written a 12-page essay out of spite too. For the record, Cornell's mellowed out a lot since then. He's a pretty cool cat these days. The idea of fractured personas takes a different form when it comes to the people trapped in the church. In many ways, the church is a working metaphor for human identity. Each of the people inside represent different methods of thinking and problem solving. Peter is the scientific mind, Emily is the artistic mind, and Treelaw is faith in higher beings, and each offer up their own ideas and theories about what's happening to them. Saul represents a subconsciousness that brings these methods of thought together. Even the Timewyrm is fractions. She's not just a destructive force of time. There's still Ishtar, the person who applied this power to herself. She sits at the center of the Timewyrm like it's a sucking candy, a jawbreaker of ultimate destruction. And while the Timewyrm is determined, Ishtar has doubt, still holds the faintest concept of morality. Another theme Timewyrm Revelation presents is that of scale. The idea that there is no such thing as simplicity or complexity, there's only the scale in which something can be observed. "Professor, what's down there?" Ace had thought she'd seen a movement in the depths below, a stirring of liquid darkness. "I don't know." The doctor glanced at her and smiled sadly. "How long is the coast of Britain?" "What? No idea." Ace was staring down into the pit, wondering if this was really important at the moment. Shakily, the doctor reached out a hand and raised her head to listen to him. "Don't gaze into the void," he advised. "Nietzsche said something similar. Also interesting things about fighting monsters. Pity about the rest of it. No, this is important. You could measure the coastline, couldn't you?" "Yeah, I suppose so." "But how carefully do you measure?" The doctor was deadly serious. "With a meter ruler? With a tape measure? Do you map every pebble, every tiny rock pool, even if they remained after the tide?" "Well, you could go down to the atomic level, making finer and finer measurements. You find more and more length, more little details. The length of the coast is infinite. The measurement depends on your distance from it." "That's stupid." Ace checked herself. For a moment she had sounded like the city dream self. She was a citizen of the universe, so she was going to listen, right? Perhaps. Like the edge of a snowflake, or like this place. The dimensions are fractional. The length of information is infinite. Above them, night was falling. The doctor talked faster as the darkness of the sky above became the same texture as that of the pit below. You could express shapes like that of his equations. The Timewyrm virus is an equation like that. You mean it's infinite? Yes, fractal. Its appearance depends only on the scale you view it from. Like that bully, Boyle. He's not important. He's very important. He's the whole world. Are you following me? Yeah. Ace quickly nodded. She had a horrible feeling that this was the last lesson, that this wisdom was an epitaph, something to take with her. There's a lot of ways you can take the idea of equivalency, but I like to think of it as a mantra for small kindnesses. We're not superheroes. Nobody really is. We're simple human beings passing through a brief moment of time. On a cosmic scale, we're nothing. All we can really hope to accomplish are small kindnesses. And yet we contain within ourselves so many complexities, so many perceptions, so many different selves, that even a small kindness can affect us in surprising ways. The reverse is also true. If you try and perceive the universe with some kind of all-encompassing objectivity, even if you allow for the existence of morality, then it can be easy to brush off small hurts as nothing to get bent out of shape about. Kids will be kids. They're just roughhousing. It builds characters. They'll grow out of it. Maybe. But what might seem like a small hurt to you could mean a world of difference to the person that hurt is being inflicted upon. Boyle seemed worried. The rules were being broken again. A grown-up was getting involved. "Don't look at me like that," he shouted. "Don't! I haven't done anything." "Big and small," the doctor muttered. He seemed to be debating with himself, but his words were aimed at Boyle. "You didn't do anything big, not in cosmic terms, but to some of your victims you were the most important thing in the world. A name that made them afraid, a word of power. Only one word in a big dictionary, but one some of them couldn't even bring themselves to say. It's only accident that magnifies your crime, like a blood-sucking flea caught under the microscope, but the universe revolves by such accidents." The doctor's strength seemed to leave him, and he slumped in a chair. "I have pity for you," he sighed. Speaking just for myself, there have been about half a dozen moments, half a dozen small hurts that happened to me between the ages of 1 and 20 that affected my person, my growth as a person in a measurably negative way. And while with time I have been able to recognize these moments and work through them, Their effects are still a part of me, a dent you can never quite beat out. Don't know what you're on about, complained Chad. I'm hungry, and I want to do horrible things to Dottie. Horrible things like what? Asked the female voice. Fill her mouth with worms, or pull out all her toenails. Really horrible things. So the angel showed Chad some pictures of really horrible things. She showed him war and grief and torture, genocide and cruelty. She showed him that these things were universal, and universally ignored when there was profit to be made or advantage to be gained. She showed him what the universe was like in her eyes. It was almost a test to see just how well suited her little partner was to her grand intentions. Or perhaps it was some frustrated search for communion. Chad had started to cry with the revelation of it all, and muttered nightmare words. When it was all over, he opened his eyes, shaken and a little older. Those two, he whispered. Those things too, but first I want to find some worms. Boyle and the Timewyrm made such good partners because they're both the same thing. They're both bullies, just at different scales. They wish to inflict pain for their own pleasure. Well, isn't that what the Doctor does? Stop the bullies? In one of the book's most chilling scenes, the Doctor is approached by everyone he's failed, including 3 of his companions who died at his side. Katarina, who was blown out an airlock, Sarah Kingdom, who was rapidly aged into dust by a doomsday device, and Adric, who was trapped in a crashing starship. These are manifestations of the Doctor's guilt, those he could not save, and it's that guilt that motivates the Doctor's decision to destroy the Timewyrm. The Doctor finally escapes his own mind, but Ace is left behind, trapped, and to destroy the Timewyrm would mean to destroy her too. But isn't that for the greater good? Ace would agree, but then she learns there's another way. I mentioned the first, third, and fourth Doctors among the specters of the Doctor's mind, but I didn't mention the fifth. Where is he? Well, the fifth Doctor didn't want to fight this battle. He rejected the seventh Doctor's declaration of war. He was, of course, the most gentle of the Doctors, the kindest and most forgiving. So, the seventh Doctor took him, tied him up, and threw him away deep into his own subconscious, at the bottom of the pit. It's Ace who finds him there, and it's Ace who frees him. Suddenly, the Doctor in the real world realizes that there might be another way. Instead of great destruction, he can win with a small kindness. He can offer Ishtar, who sits at the core of the Timewyrm, a way out, a second chance, a gesture of peace. 2016 has been a pretty awful year in general. I don't think most people would argue against that. Sure, you could bring up statistics that show that fewer people died this year or whatever, but it isn't about math. It's about pain and our perception of pain. It seems with increasing frequency that we as a species are choosing hate over love, that it is better to kill someone than try and understand someone. It seems that hatred of other people is now the mainstream. It is driving our politics. It is driving our religions. It is driving our day-to-day lives. And there are times where I feel helpless against it. I'm sure there are many of you that feel the same. But if nothing else, we have small kindnesses. They may seem insignificant in the monolithic shadow of this awful place. But for somebody, a small kindness could mean the world. Noticing them, recognizing their pain, asking them if they need help. For some people, that could mean the difference between life and death. Empathy, understanding, these are things so often overlooked and things we so desperately need. And sometimes we need a reminder. We need to see these small kindnesses in our heroes, in the people we look up to. We need to see the Doctor extend a hand of friendship to a being that wished him dead. Sometimes going through life is like watching The Brain of Morbius, a literal horror show. And we need to be reminded that at the end, the good guys do win. Oh man, I've barely scratched the surface here. There is so much more I could talk about. I could have done a video twice as long. I skipped so many things. The flower, the three witches, the demon circus, Hemmings and his fantasy realm, the tiled floor, the spiral staircase, the world tree, Johnny Chess, the one-eyed monk, what that baby was even about. This book is incredibly dense with ideas. It seems like there's something new on every single page, a new idea, a new image. This is a book overflowing with ideas, exciting ideas at that, and ideas that can only be done in the printed world. This is the first story in the Virgin New Adventures that really seems to fit the mantra of too broad and too deep for the small screen. It is perhaps too much. This book can be capable of overwhelming the reader, and a significant chunk of the symbolism will be lost on people who aren't passably familiar with the original series. I would not recommend this book as your first Doctor Who experience, but once you have the magic ring to decode it, there is a ton to take away. This is also the first book that has measurable influence over the revived series. Paul Cornell would reuse the church as sanctuary setting in the television story Father's Day, and a lot of themes and images here echo throughout the series, from a child in a spacesuit to the idea of a pile of bad things and good things in Vincent and the Doctor. Maybe not all deliberately, but this was important groundwork for what a Doctor Who story could be. Paul Cornell is the real deal, guys. This is when the Virgin New Adventures gets really exciting. Next time, the Cardinal Master Plan hits the Virgin New Adventures like a wrecking ball, and the TARDIS explodes. Can Ace and her new kitty friend put things back together, or will they become lunch for the giant worm monsters?